What happens when a man who can buy anything in the world discovers that the one thing his daughter needs most can't be purchased? When success becomes a prison and love becomes a stranger in your own home. This is the story of how a simple recipe and an act of pure compassion shattered the walls of wealth and brought a family back from the brink of losing everything that truly mattered. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Patterson mansion, but 15-year-old Emma Patterson couldn't see them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She lay curled in her four-poster bed, wrapped in Egyptian cotton sheets that cost more than most people's monthly salary, staring at the ornate ceiling with hollow eyes that had once sparkled with life. The room around her was a testament to her father's wealth: designer furniture, imported artwork, shelves lined with books she no longer had the energy to read. Yet despite being surrounded by luxury, Emma felt like she was disappearing, fading away like morning mist. Downstairs, her father, Robert Patterson, was already dressed in his custom-tailored navy suit, reviewing quarterly reports over black coffee in his home office. At 45, Robert was the embodiment of American success. His technology company, Patterson Industries, had revolutionized cloud computing and made him one of the youngest billionaires in the country. His name graced the covers of business magazines, his opinions moved stock markets, and his presence commanded boardrooms from Silicon Valley to Wall Street. But all the power and prestige in the world couldn't solve the crisis unfolding under his own roof. Emma hadn't eaten a proper meal in 12 days. The decline had been gradual at first, so subtle that Robert had missed the early warning signs. Emma had always been a perfectionist, driven by an internal need to excel that matched his own ambitious nature. She was valedictorian material, captain of the debate team, fluent in 3 languages, and accomplished on both violin and piano. Her schedule was packed with advanced placement courses, test prep sessions, volunteer work that would look impressive on college applications, and extracurricular activities designed to build the perfect resume. She was, by every measurable standard, the ideal daughter of a successful man. But perfection had become a cage, and Emma was suffocating inside it. The trouble had started 6 months ago when Robert married his second wife, Victoria. Victoria Patterson was everything his first wife, Emma's mother, Sarah, had not been. Where Sarah had been warm and nurturing, Victoria was polished and ambitious. Where Sarah had filled their home with laughter and homemade meals, Victoria transformed it into a showplace worthy of architectural magazines. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and had grand plans for both Robert's social standing and Emma's future. Victoria came from old money, the kind of family that valued appearances above all else. She immediately began reshaping Emma's life to fit her vision of what a Patterson daughter should be. The casual clothes Emma loved were replaced with designer outfits. Her comfortable bedroom was redecorated in stark whites and metallics. Her free time was filled with additional tutoring sessions, social etiquette classes, and charity events where she was expected to smile and network like a miniature adult. The pressure had been mounting for months, but the breaking point came during a family dinner 3 weeks ago. Victoria had been discussing Emma's upcoming junior year, mapping out a schedule so intensive it left no room for anything resembling a normal teenage life. When Emma timidly suggested she might want to take an art class instead of a third science course, Victoria's response was swift and cutting. "Art is a hobby, Emma, not a career path. We're not raising you to be average. With your father's resources and connections, there's no excuse for settling for anything less than extraordinary. Harvard doesn't accept students who waste time on frivolous pursuits." Robert had said nothing during this exchange, his attention divided between his phone and the conversation. His silence felt like agreement to Emma, like confirmation that he too saw her dreams as worthless. That night she barely touched her dinner. The next day she picked at her lunch. By the end of the week she was surviving on small bites and constant excuses. Food became the enemy, the one thing she could control in a life where every other decision was made for her. Each meal skipped felt like a small victory, a quiet rebellion against the suffocating expectations surrounding her. She told herself she was being disciplined, that she was taking charge of her life in the only way available to her. She became an expert at moving food around on her plate, at hiding portions in napkins, at creating the illusion of eating while consuming virtually nothing. The physical changes came quickly. Emma's clothes began to hang loose on her frame. The healthy glow in her cheeks faded to a pale, translucent quality. Her thick chestnut hair started to thin and lose its shine. She felt cold constantly, even in the warmest rooms, and her concentration began to falter. The energy she once channeled into her studies and activities evaporated, leaving her exhausted and listless. Robert noticed something was wrong, but his instinct was to treat it like a business problem that could be solved with resources and efficiency. He arranged for a physical exam with the family's private physician, Dr. Morrison, who ran extensive tests that revealed nutritional deficiencies but no underlying medical condition. When pressed, Emma insisted she was fine, just stressed about school. Dr. Morrison recommended rest and proper nutrition, advice that seemed simple enough to follow. But Emma couldn't follow it. The very sight of food had become overwhelming. Her stomach, shrunken from days of minimal intake, rebelled against even small portions. The smell of cooking made her nauseous. Meal times became battlegrounds where Victoria would grow increasingly frustrated with Emma's lack of appetite, and Robert would oscillate between concern and irritation at his daughter's apparent stubbornness. Victoria's approach to the problem was characteristically direct and counterproductive. She hired a nutritionist who created elaborate meal plans full of superfoods and supplements. She replaced all the food in the house with organic alternatives, thinking Emma might respond to higher quality options. She even arranged for a private chef to prepare meals specifically designed to be appetizing to teenagers. But none of these expensive solutions addressed the real issue. Emma wasn't avoiding food because of its quality or preparation. She was avoiding it because eating had become psychologically impossible. The household staff watched this unfolding crisis with growing concern, but none felt it was their place to intervene. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, had worked for the family for 8 years and had watched Emma grow from a cheerful 7-year-old into the withdrawn teenager she was becoming. She noticed how Emma's uniforms needed constant alterations, how the girl moved through the house like a ghost, how her laughter had completely disappeared from the halls that once rang with her voice. Mrs. Chen had tried small gestures, leaving Emma's favorite cookies by her bedroom door, or preparing simple comfort foods that might be more appealing. But Victoria had put a stop to such unauthorized food offerings, insisting that all of Emma's nutrition be carefully monitored and controlled. The irony was devastating. In their efforts to ensure Emma ate properly, they had created an environment where eating became even more difficult. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when Emma collapsed during her morning jog. Robert had insisted she maintain her exercise routine despite her obvious weight loss, believing that physical activity would stimulate her appetite. Instead, her weakened body simply gave out. She was found unconscious on the estate's running path by the groundskeeper, who immediately called for help. The paramedics who responded were shocked by Emma's condition. Her blood pressure was dangerously low, her heart rate erratic, and her body temperature couldn't regulate properly. She was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where emergency room doctors immediately recognized the signs of severe malnutrition. Blood tests confirmed what Robert had been unable to accept: his daughter was slowly starving herself to death. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the attending physician, pulled Robert aside for a conversation that shattered his understanding of his own family. Emma's condition was critical. Her body was beginning to shut down non-essential functions to preserve vital organs. Her bone density was compromised, her immune system weakened, and her heart was showing signs of strain that could become permanent if not addressed immediately. "Mr. Patterson," Dr. Walsh said gently, "your daughter is suffering from what appears to be an eating disorder. This isn't about willpower or teenage rebellion. This is a serious mental health condition that requires immediate intervention and long-term treatment. The words hit Robert like a physical blow. Eating disorder, mental health condition. These were problems he associated with other families, not his own. He was a problem solver, a man who built solutions from nothing and conquered markets through sheer determination. How had he missed something so fundamental happening to his own child? Emma was admitted to the hospital's adolescent unit for stabilization and monitoring. The next 72 hours became a blur of medical consultations, psychological evaluations, and difficult conversations with specialists who explained the complex nature of eating disorders. Robert learned that these conditions weren't simply about food or vanity, but about control, perfectionism, anxiety, and often trauma. He learned that they had the highest mortality rate of any mental health disorder, and that recovery required not just medical intervention but fundamental changes in family dynamics and communication patterns. Victoria's reaction to the crisis was to immediately begin researching the most exclusive treatment facilities in the country. She compiled lists of renowned specialists, luxury rehabilitation centers, and intensive programs that promised discretion and results. Her instinct, like Robert's, was to throw money at the problem until it disappeared. She spoke about Emma's condition in clinical terms, as if it were a temporary setback that could be efficiently managed and overcome. But Emma herself seemed to withdraw further with each passing day in the hospital. She was compliant with the medical team, following their instructions and accepting the IV fluids that were slowly stabilizing her condition. However, she spoke very little, especially to Robert and Victoria. When they visited, she would turn toward the window and give brief, polite responses to their questions. The vibrant, articulate girl who had once dominated debate competitions was barely present. It was during one of these tense hospital visits that Robert first heard about Maria Santos. Emma had been assigned a social worker named Jennifer Kim, who was helping coordinate her care and transition planning. During a family meeting, Miss Kim mentioned that Emma had been asking about the possibility of having home-cooked meals as part of her recovery plan rather than continuing with the rigid nutritional protocols Victoria had been implementing. She specifically asked about simpler foods, Miss Kim explained. Sometimes patients recovering from restrictive eating patterns respond better to comfort foods that don't feel clinical or intimidating. Has she mentioned any particular dishes or cooking styles that appeal to her? Emma spoke up for the first time in the meeting, her voice quiet but clear. The lady who cleans our house sometimes brings lunch that smells really good. It always smells like home, not like diet food or health food. Just like someone's grandmother made it. Robert realized Emma was talking about Maria Santos, the woman who came to their house twice a week to handle deep cleaning tasks that the regular housekeeping staff didn't cover. Maria worked for a cleaning service that provided staff to several wealthy households in their area, and Robert honestly couldn't have picked her out of a lineup. She was part of the invisible workforce that kept his life running smoothly, someone he might nod to in passing but had never actually spoken with. Victoria's expression tightened at Emma's comment. She clearly didn't approve of Emma's interest in what she probably considered inappropriate food from an unauthorized source. But Dr. Walsh, who had been observing the family dynamics throughout Emma's stay, leaned forward with interest. "Tell me more about why those smells appealed to you, Emma," she said gently. Emma's response was the most animated she had been in days. "It never smells like it's trying to be healthy or perfect. It just smells like someone made it because they wanted to make something good, not because they had to follow a plan or hit certain nutritional targets, just because they wanted to feed someone they cared about."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
This was a man accustomed to purchasing solutions, but he was beginning to understand that what his daughter needed couldn't be bought. "Mr. Patterson," Maria said carefully, "cooking is not just about following recipes. It's about understanding why you want to feed someone, what they need to feel better, how to make food feel like love instead of like work." Robert nodded eagerly, though Maria suspected he didn't fully grasp what she meant. Yes, exactly. That's what I think Emma needs. Something that feels like caring instead of treatment. Maria made a decision that went against every professional boundary she had maintained during her cleaning career. I will help Emma learn to cook, she said. But not for extra money. You cannot pay someone to care about your daughter. Either I care because she is a young person who needs help, or it will not work. The simplicity of her statement seemed to stun Robert. He was clearly unused to having his offers of payment refused, especially by someone whose economic circumstances made such refusal particularly meaningful. But Maria had learned from her own experiences as a mother that genuine care couldn't be purchased or contracted. It had to arise from authentic human connection. I don't understand, Robert said. You're already working 2 jobs to support your family. How can I ask you to take on additional responsibilities without compensation? You cannot ask me, Maria replied firmly, but you can let me offer. Emma is the same age as my Sophia. If my daughter was sick and needed help from someone who understood food and cooking, I would hope that person would help because it was the right thing to do, not because they were being paid to pretend to care. This conversation marked the beginning of a relationship that would challenge every assumption Robert held about class, money, and what truly mattered in life. Maria wasn't rejecting his offer out of pride or stubbornness. She was establishing the foundation for something that couldn't exist within the transactional relationships that defined most of Robert's world. She was creating space for authentic human connection based on mutual respect and shared concern for Emma's well-being. When Emma was finally released from the hospital after 2 weeks of stabilization and initial treatment, she returned to a house that looked the same but felt different. The medical crisis had shaken everyone's assumptions about their family dynamics and forced conversations that had been avoided for months. Emma was physically fragile but mentally more present than she had been in months, as if the hospitalization had cleared away some of the fog that had been clouding her thinking. Her treatment plan included ongoing therapy, medical monitoring, and a gradual reintroduction to normal activities. But it also included something unusual: cooking lessons with Maria as a form of therapeutic intervention. Dr. Walsh had been intrigued by Emma's positive response to the idea during their hospital conversations and had worked with the family to incorporate cooking into her recovery plan. The first cooking session was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon, 3 days after Emma's return home. Maria arrived at the usual time for her cleaning shift, but instead of heading immediately to her work areas, she was directed to the kitchen where Emma was waiting. The teenager looked fragile and nervous, her hands fidgeting with the sleeves of an oversized sweater that emphasized how much weight she had lost. "Hi, Emma," Maria said warmly, her voice carrying the same gentle tone she used with her own daughter. "Are you ready to learn something new?" Emma nodded but remained silent. Maria could see the anxiety in her posture, the way she held herself as if preparing for criticism or failure. This was a young person who had learned to associate performance with approval, who expected every activity to be evaluated and judged. Maria began by ignoring the elaborate kitchen equipment and expensive ingredients that Victoria had stocked in preparation for the cooking lessons. Instead, she pulled out a canvas bag she had brought from home, containing simple ingredients: onions, garlic, tomatoes, rice, black beans and spices in small containers that had been used and refilled countless times. "First thing we learn," Maria said, beginning to unpack her bag, "is that good food does not come from expensive ingredients. Good food comes from understanding what each ingredient wants to do, how they work together, how to treat them with respect." She handed Emma a yellow onion, its papery skin slightly wrinkled but still firm. "This onion, it wants to make things taste better. But first it makes us cry, right? That's okay. Crying is part of cooking sometimes. It means we are paying attention." Emma held the onion uncertainly, clearly waiting for specific instructions about proper technique or optimal preparation methods. Instead, Maria began peeling her own onion with her hands, talking quietly as she worked. "My grandmother taught me to cook in El Salvador. We did not have measuring cups or timers or special knives. We had our hands, our noses, our tongues to taste. We learned to feel when food was ready, not to watch the clock." She guided Emma through the process of peeling the onion, not correcting her technique but simply sharing the sensory experience of preparing food. They moved slowly, with Maria narrating each step not as instruction but as conversation. "Now we cut the onion. Some people say there is one right way to cut onions, but I think the onion does not care how we cut it as long as we do it with attention. The important thing is all pieces should be about the same size so they cook at the same time. That is fairness in cooking." Emma's cuts were uneven and hesitant, nothing like the precise julienne strips Victoria's hired chef had demonstrated during previous cooking attempts. But Maria didn't correct her technique. Instead, she praised Emma's focus and attention to the task. As they worked, the kitchen began to fill with the fundamental aromas of cooking: onions softening in oil, garlic releasing its fragrance, spices blooming in the heat. For the first time in months, Emma seemed to relax slightly, her shoulders dropping as she became absorbed in the simple, repetitive tasks Maria guided her through. They prepared a basic rice and bean dish, nothing exotic or complicated, but something that filled the kitchen with the kind of nurturing warmth that had been absent from Emma's life for too long. Maria explained each step not in terms of technique but in terms of purpose: why they cooked the onions until they were translucent, why they added the rice to the oil before adding liquid, why they let everything simmer slowly instead of rushing the process. "Cooking teaches patience," Maria said as they waited for the rice to absorb the liquid. "American culture wants everything fast, but good things take time. Your body, your heart, they need time to heal too. Cannot rush healing any more than you can rush rice." When their simple meal was finally ready, Maria served it in 2 regular bowls, not the carefully portioned plates that had become standard in the Patterson household. She didn't mention calories or nutritional content or any of the clinical language that had made eating feel like medical treatment for Emma. Instead, she blessed the food quietly in Spanish, a habit from her own childhood that she had never abandoned. Emma ate slowly but steadily, surprising herself by finishing the entire bowl. The food tasted like comfort, like care, like someone had made it specifically for her well-being rather than to meet external requirements. For the first time in months, eating felt like nourishment instead of punishment. As they cleaned up together, Emma spoke more than she had in weeks, asking questions about Maria's grandmother, about El Salvador, about the other dishes Maria knew how to prepare. Maria answered patiently, sharing stories that painted pictures of a life very different from Emma's, but filled with the same fundamental needs: family, safety, love and food that connected people to each other and to their heritage. Victoria arrived home during their cleanup process and was clearly displeased to find the kitchen in disarray, the air thick with unfamiliar spices and evidence of unauthorized cooking scattered across her pristine countertops. Her vision of cooking lessons had involved structured instruction from a professional culinary instructor, not what appeared to be an informal cultural exchange with the cleaning lady. "Emma," Victoria said sharply, "you know you're supposed to follow your meal plan. We can't have you eating random foods without knowing their exact nutritional content." The criticism hit Emma like a physical blow, and Maria watched the teenager's shoulders immediately tense with familiar anxiety. But before Emma could retreat into her usual pattern of apologetic silence, Maria spoke up. "Mrs. Patterson," she said respectfully but firmly, "Emma ate a full bowl of food today. She helped prepare it, she enjoyed eating it, and her body got good nutrition. Sometimes the best meal plan is the one that helps someone remember that eating can be a happy thing." The quiet challenge in Maria's voice created a moment of tension that revealed the fundamental conflict developing in the household. Victoria represented the world of measurement, control and optimization that had contributed to Emma's crisis. Maria represented something entirely different: intuitive care, cultural wisdom, and the understanding that healing sometimes required releasing the need for perfect control. Robert, who had been watching from the doorway, stepped forward to defuse the situation. He had observed the entire cooking session from his home office, noting Emma's increased energy and engagement, her willingness to eat, and the first genuine smiles he had seen from her since before her hospitalization. "Victoria," he said quietly. "Emma ate, she enjoyed it. That's what matters right now." The cooking lessons continued twice a week, always on Maria's regular cleaning days, always using simple ingredients that emphasized flavor and comfort over exotic sophistication. Emma learned to prepare basic dishes from Maria's cultural heritage, but more importantly, she began to rebuild a relationship with food based on care and nourishment, rather than fear and control. Each session brought new discoveries. Emma learned that cooking engaged all of her senses, that the process of preparing food could be meditative and grounding, that sharing meals created connections between people that transcended cultural and economic differences. She began to eat more regularly, drawn by her own participation in creating the food rather than having it prescribed and monitored by others. Maria, in turn, began to see past Emma's privilege to recognize a young person struggling with pressures and expectations that money couldn't solve. She shared stories from her own daughter's challenges, offering perspective that helped Emma understand she wasn't alone in feeling overwhelmed by others' expectations. But as Emma's relationship with food and eating began to improve, other tensions in the household intensified. Victoria felt increasingly threatened by Maria's influence and by Emma's obvious preference for their cooking sessions over the structured activities Victoria had planned. She began to question whether it was appropriate for household staff to take on such personal roles in family dynamics, suggesting that professional boundaries were being violated. More concerning was Victoria's growing suspicion that Maria was somehow taking advantage of the family's vulnerability. She couldn't understand why someone would refuse additional payment for extra work unless they had ulterior motives. In Victoria's experience, people always wanted something in return for their efforts, and she was determined to discover what Maria was really after. These suspicions would soon lead to a confrontation that would test everyone's commitment to Emma's recovery and force the family to confront some uncomfortable truths about the difference between paying for services and receiving genuine care. But for now, Emma was eating, cooking, and beginning to rediscover joy in one of life's most fundamental activities. The healing had begun, even if the real challenges lay ahead. 3 weeks into the cooking lessons, Victoria Patterson had reached her breaking point. She stood in her walk-in closet selecting an outfit for the charity luncheon she would be attending that afternoon, but her mind was consumed with the situation unfolding in her own kitchen. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she returned home to find her pristine culinary space transformed into what she considered a chaotic mess of unauthorized ingredients and unfamiliar aromas. More disturbing was Emma's obvious attachment to these sessions and her growing resistance to the structured meal plans Victoria had so carefully researched and implemented. Victoria had built her identity around control and optimization. She managed Robert's social calendar with military precision, coordinated household operations like a corporate executive, and approached Emma's recovery with the same systematic methodology she applied to every challenge. The idea that a cleaning woman with no formal training or credentials could succeed where expensive specialists had failed was not just frustrating, it was personally insulting. But beyond her wounded pride lay a deeper concern that she couldn't articulate even to herself. Victoria had married Robert partly for love, but also for the lifestyle and security his wealth provided. She had no children of her own, and her relationship with Emma had always been complicated by the girl's obvious loyalty to her deceased mother's memory. The cooking lessons represented more than just a deviation from approved treatment protocols. They represented a threat to Victoria's position as the primary female authority in the household. Maria's easy rapport with Emma, their shared laughter during cooking sessions, and Emma's obvious trust in the older woman created a dynamic that Victoria had never been able to establish despite 2 years of marriage. Victoria had tried to bond with Emma through shared shopping trips, cultural events and educational activities, but their interactions always felt stilted and artificial compared to the natural warmth Emma displayed during her time with Maria. The breaking point came when Victoria overheard a phone conversation between Emma and one of her friends from school. Emma was describing her cooking lessons with genuine enthusiasm, laughing as she recounted Maria's stories about her grandmother's kitchen in El Salvador. But what stopped Victoria cold was Emma's casual comment, "She's like the mom I wish I had now. She actually listens to me and doesn't make me feel like everything I do has to be perfect."
The simplicity and longing in Emma's voice created a moment of silence in the room. Robert felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition that his daughter was describing something he had completely lost sight of in his pursuit of optimized living. When had meals in their house become clinical events rather than expressions of care? When had food become a battlefield instead of a source of comfort and connection? Dr. Walsh addressed the room, but kept her focus on Emma. "It sounds like you're responding to the emotional component of food preparation. The intention behind cooking can be just as nourishing as the food itself. Would you be interested in exploring some cooking or food preparation as part of your recovery process?" Emma nodded, the first genuinely positive response she had given to any treatment suggestion. Victoria looked skeptical, but Robert found himself speaking up. "If Emma thinks that would help, then we should explore it, whatever she needs." The meeting concluded with a plan to gradually introduce Emma to food preparation and cooking as complementary therapy, alongside her medical treatment and counseling. The idea was that by participating in the creation of her meals, Emma might begin to rebuild a healthy relationship with food and eating. It was an unconventional approach, but Dr. Walsh explained that recovery often required creative solutions tailored to each individual patient. That evening, Robert sat alone in Emma's hospital room after visiting hours, watching his daughter sleep. The medical equipment monitoring her vital signs provided a constant reminder of how close they had come to losing her entirely. He thought about the years since Sarah's death, about how he had buried himself in work and achievements while his daughter slowly disappeared right in front of him. He thought about Victoria's well-intentioned but ultimately harmful attempts to mold Emma into her vision of perfection. He thought about his own failures as a father, his inability to see past external measures of success to recognize his daughter's pain. For the first time in years, Robert Patterson found himself crying. Not the controlled, private tears he had shed at Sarah's funeral, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place of absolute despair and recognition. He had built an empire but failed to protect his own child. He had surrounded her with every luxury, while allowing her to starve for the things that truly mattered: unconditional love, acceptance, and the simple pleasure of being seen and valued for who she was rather than what she could achieve. As he sat in that sterile hospital room, Robert made a decision that would change everything. He was going to learn how to be the father Emma needed, not the one he thought she should have. He was going to tear down the walls of expectation and perfection that had nearly killed his daughter and build something entirely different in their place. He was going to start by finding Maria Santos and asking her to teach him how to make food that smelled like home. The next morning, Robert called his office and cleared his calendar for the indefinite future. For the first time in his adult life, his business empire would have to run without his constant oversight. His daughter needed him more than his shareholders did, and he was finally ready to act like the father he should have been all along. Emma's recovery would be long and difficult, requiring professional treatment and family therapy, and fundamental changes in how they all related to each other. But it would begin with something as simple as a home-cooked meal prepared with love rather than calculation.
Robert didn't know it yet, but Maria Santos was about to teach him that the most powerful ingredients couldn't be bought in any store, and that sometimes the most profound healing happens not in hospitals or therapy offices, but around a simple table where people who care about each other share food that nourishes both body and soul. The golden cage that had nearly destroyed his family was about to be transformed into something entirely different, a real home where love was measured not in achievements or expectations, but in the daily acts of care that make life worth living. Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished mopping the last section of the Patterson mansion's marble entryway. At 38, she had been cleaning houses for wealthy families for over 15 years, ever since she had arrived from El Salvador with nothing but determination and a fierce desire to build a better life for her children. Her hands were calloused from years of scrubbing, her back ached constantly, and her feet had developed permanent calluses from standing on hard surfaces for 10 hours a day. Yet she approached each job with the same meticulous care and quiet dignity that had earned her a reputation as one of the most reliable workers in the cleaning service. Maria had 2 children of her own, Carlos, who was 17 and working part-time while finishing high school, and Sofia, who was 14 and reminded Maria daily of why she endured the long hours and physical demands of her work. Every dollar she earned went toward their education, their clothes, their future. She lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that gentrification hadn't yet discovered, where the sounds of children playing in Spanish mixed with the hum of city traffic and the occasional siren. When she worked in houses like the Patterson mansion, Maria moved through them like a respectful ghost. She had learned early in her career that wealthy families preferred their help to be invisible, efficient, and silent. She never touched personal items beyond what was necessary for cleaning, never lingered in family spaces, and never initiated conversations with the homeowners. Her job was to maintain the perfect environment these families expected, then disappear until the next scheduled cleaning. But Maria was also observant. In 15 years of cleaning intimate family spaces, she had developed an instinct for reading the emotional climate of households. She could tell when marriages were troubled by the way personal items migrated to opposite ends of bedrooms. She could sense financial stress by the sudden absence of fresh flowers or the appearance of discount products in otherwise luxury-stocked pantries. She could identify family conflicts by the tension that seemed to linger in rooms even after arguments had ended. In the Patterson house, Maria had noticed troubling changes over the past few months. The teenage girl, Emma, had always been polite when their paths crossed, offering a shy smile or a quiet hello before hurrying off to her room. But lately, Emma moved through the house like a wraith, her clothes hanging loose on her shrinking frame, her eyes holding the hollow quality that reminded Maria of refugees she had known back home who had endured too much loss. Maria had also observed the dynamics between family members during the time she worked while they were home. The new wife, Victoria, spoke to Emma with the kind of sharp precision that cut rather than guided. The father seemed perpetually distracted, his attention absorbed by devices and phone calls even during what should have been family time. The household staff whispered concerns in the kitchen, but none felt empowered to intervene in family matters that seemed beyond their scope. It was during one of her regular Tuesday cleanings that Maria first noticed Emma hadn't been eating. She was cleaning the dining room when she observed that Emma's place setting remained largely untouched from the previous evening's dinner. The food had been carefully arranged to look consumed, but Maria could tell the difference between a plate that had been eaten from and one that had been artfully rearranged. She had raised 2 teenagers. She knew every trick they used to avoid eating vegetables or foods they disliked. Over the following weeks, Maria began paying closer attention. Emma's bathroom trash contained tissues but no food wrappers. Her bedroom showed no signs of hidden snacks or evidence of eating. The kitchen staff mentioned that Emma's lunch requests had become increasingly infrequent, and when food was sent to her room, it often returned barely touched. Maria's maternal instincts began to override her professional boundaries.
She had watched her own daughter struggle with body image and social pressures, though Sophia's challenges paled in comparison to what she was observing in this house. The difference was that Sophia had a mother who noticed changes immediately, who created space for honest conversations, who could offer comfort food and unconditional love when the world felt overwhelming. Emma appeared to have none of these supports. Her father was physically present but emotionally absent. Her stepmother seemed more concerned with Emma's external achievements than her internal well-being. The household staff, while caring, maintained professional distance that prevented them from addressing personal issues. Emma was surrounded by people yet completely alone in her struggle. The situation came to a crisis point on the morning Maria arrived to find the house in chaos. Paramedics were wheeling a stretcher toward an ambulance, and she could see Emma's pale, unconscious form being loaded inside. Victoria stood on the front steps speaking rapidly into her phone, coordinating logistics with the efficiency she applied to everything else. Robert paced beside his car, his usual composure shattered, his face a mask of panic and disbelief. Maria had intended to quietly retreat, to come back another day when the family crisis had passed. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was the memory of Emma's shy smiles during their brief encounters. Perhaps it was her own mother's heart recognizing a child in desperate need. Perhaps it was the understanding that sometimes the people closest to a situation are the least equipped to see it clearly. She approached Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper, who was standing in the doorway watching the ambulance disappear down the long driveway. "What happened to Emma?" Maria asked quietly in the mixture of English and Spanish that the household staff often used when the family wasn't present. Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears. "She collapsed during her morning run. She's been getting thinner and thinner, barely eating anything for weeks. I think," she lowered her voice, "I think she's very sick." Maria nodded, her heart heavy with recognition. She had seen this before in her own extended family and community. She knew the signs of a young person who had lost their way with food, who had turned eating into an enemy rather than a source of nourishment and comfort. She also knew that healing required more than medical intervention. It required love, patience, and often the kind of practical wisdom that couldn't be found in textbooks or purchased with money. When she returned to work the following week, the house felt different. Emma was still in the hospital, and the remaining family members moved through their routines with mechanical precision that masked their underlying anxiety. Victoria had hired a team of specialists and was researching treatment facilities with the same methodical approach she applied to every challenge. Robert had cleared his calendar but seemed lost without the constant demands of his business to occupy his mind. It was during this period that Maria made a decision that would change everything. She began bringing her own lunch to work instead of purchasing food from the expensive delis near her other cleaning locations. More importantly, she began preparing lunches that filled the Patterson kitchen with aromas that had been absent for months: the warm spice of cumin and paprika, the comfort of rice and beans simmering slowly, the homey sweetness of plantains caramelizing in their own natural sugars. Maria's cooking was a reflection of her heritage and her heart. She had learned to cook from her grandmother in El Salvador, who believed that food was medicine for both body and soul. Her recipes weren't complicated or exotic, but they were prepared with the kind of love and attention that transformed simple ingredients into something nurturing and healing. When she cooked, she thought about the people who would eat the food, about what they needed not just nutritionally but emotionally. The first person to notice was Mrs. Chen, who commented on how wonderful the kitchen smelled during Maria's lunch break. Then the other household staff began asking about her recipes, drawn by aromas that reminded them of their own family kitchens and cultural traditions. Soon Maria was sharing food with the other workers, creating an informal community meal that brought warmth and humanity into the sterile perfection of the Patterson mansion. It was Robert who finally sought her out. He found her in the kitchen during her lunch break, heating up rice and beans in a small pot while corn tortillas warmed on a griddle. The sight of someone actually cooking in his high-tech kitchen seemed to surprise him. For months, the space had been used primarily for reheating prepared meals or assembling the carefully portioned dishes Victoria's nutritionist had prescribed for Emma. "Excuse me," Robert said hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable with initiating conversation with household staff. "You're Maria, right? From the cleaning service?" Maria nodded, immediately moving to clean up her cooking area. She assumed she was being asked to confine her meal preparation to areas that wouldn't interfere with the family's use of the kitchen. "No, please, don't put anything away," Robert said quickly. "I actually wanted to ask you about that. The cooking, I mean. Emma is in the hospital, and the doctors think that getting her interested in food again might be part of her recovery. She mentioned that she liked the smells when you brought lunch. I was wondering," he paused, clearly uncertain how to proceed. "I was wondering if you might be willing to teach her some simple cooking when she comes home. I would pay you, of course, for the extra time." Maria studied Robert's face carefully. She saw desperation there, but also something else, a recognition that his usual methods of solving problems weren't working for this situation.
The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. After 2 years of trying to create a meaningful relationship with Emma, after researching child psychology and attending family therapy sessions, after carefully planning activities and conversations designed to build trust and connection, a house cleaner had effortlessly achieved what Victoria had been unable to accomplish. The comparison was devastating, but it also ignited something darker, a determination to prove that Maria was not the saint Emma believed her to be. Victoria began her investigation with the methodical approach she applied to all problems. She started by researching Maria's background through the cleaning service that employed her. The information was sparse but concerning. Maria Santos, 38 years old, divorced, 2 children, worked multiple jobs to support her family. No criminal background, excellent references from previous employers, but significant financial pressures that Victoria found suspicious. Why would someone in such desperate economic circumstances refuse additional payment for extra work? Victoria's experience had taught her that people always acted in their own financial interest, especially those struggling to make ends meet. Maria's insistence on helping Emma without compensation struck Victoria as either naive or calculating, and she was increasingly convinced it was the latter. Victoria's suspicions deepened when she began observing Maria more closely during her regular cleaning shifts. She noticed that Maria sometimes used her phone during breaks, speaking quietly in Spanish to someone Victoria assumed was family. During one of these conversations, Victoria positioned herself where she could overhear, and while her Spanish was limited, she caught enough fragments to understand that Maria was discussing money with someone, mentioning amounts that seemed significant for someone in her financial position. What Victoria didn't realize was that Maria was talking to her son Carlos about his part-time job at a local grocery store, helping him calculate whether his earnings would be enough to cover his school supplies for the upcoming semester. But Victoria's suspicions transformed the innocent conversation into evidence of something more sinister. The confrontation Victoria had been building toward finally erupted on a Thursday evening in late October. Emma had spent the afternoon with Maria learning to prepare a traditional Salvadoran soup called sopa de pollo, a hearty dish with chicken, vegetables and rice that filled the kitchen with the kind of aromatic warmth that had become associated with healing and comfort in the Patterson household. Emma had eaten 2 full bowls of the soup, her appetite stronger than it had been in months, and was excitedly telling Robert about the cooking techniques Maria had taught her when Victoria arrived home from a board meeting. The sight of Emma animated and engaged, combined with the lingering smells of unauthorized cooking, pushed Victoria beyond her carefully maintained composure. "Emma, go to your room," Victoria commanded, her voice sharp with barely controlled anger. "Your father and I need to discuss something privately." Emma looked confused and hurt by the sudden shift in atmosphere, but she obediently gathered her things and headed upstairs. Robert started to object to Victoria's abrupt dismissal of their daughter, but Victoria's expression warned him that a major confrontation was imminent. "We need to talk about what's been happening in this house," Victoria began, her tone cold and precise. "I've been patient with this cooking experiment, but I'm starting to have serious concerns about Maria's motives and the appropriateness of her involvement in Emma's treatment." Robert felt his stomach tighten. The cooking lessons had been the first thing to genuinely help Emma since her hospitalization, and he was prepared to defend them against any challenge. "What concerns? Emma is eating regularly, she's engaged and happy, and her therapist supports the cooking sessions as part of her recovery. Think about it logically, Robert," Victoria continued, pacing the length of their living room. "Why would someone refuse payment for additional work unless they had ulterior motives? Maria is in financial difficulty. We know that from her employment records. She has children to support, bills to pay, yet she insists on helping Emma for free. That doesn't make sense unless she's positioning herself for something bigger." The accusation hung in the air between them, poisonous and specific. Robert felt something cold settle in his chest as he recognized the familiar pattern of Victoria's thinking. She approached every human interaction as a transaction, every relationship as a negotiation with winners and losers. The idea that someone might offer genuine care without expecting compensation was literally incomprehensible to her. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Robert asked, though he dreaded the answer. Victoria pulled out her phone and began scrolling through notes she had been keeping. "I've been documenting suspicious behavior. Phone conversations about money during work hours. Interest in Emma's personal life that goes beyond appropriate boundaries. The fact that she's systematically undermining the treatment protocols we established with medical professionals. I think she's grooming Emma for something, possibly planning to exploit our family's wealth and vulnerability." The clinical language Victoria used to describe Maria's behavior revealed the fundamental difference in how the two women approached relationships. Where Victoria saw manipulation and calculation, Robert had observed genuine care and maternal instinct. Where Victoria identified boundary violations, Robert recognized the kind of authentic connection Emma had been desperately needing. But Victoria's accusations forced Robert to confront an uncomfortable truth about his own psychology. Despite everything he had witnessed during the cooking lessons, despite Emma's obvious improvement and happiness, part of him was predisposed to believe Victoria's interpretation. His business success had been built on skepticism and careful analysis of people's motivations. He had learned to look for hidden agendas and ulterior motives in every interaction. "I want you to talk to her," Victoria demanded. "Tonight. Before this goes any further, we need to establish clear boundaries and make it absolutely clear that any attempt to take advantage of our family will result in immediate termination and legal action if necessary." Robert found himself nodding, caught between his protective instincts for Emma and his ingrained suspicion of people whose motivations he couldn't easily categorize. He agreed to speak with Maria the following day, but even as he made the commitment, he felt a deep unease about what he was about to do. Maria arrived for her regular Friday cleaning shift unaware that her position in the household had become the subject of intense scrutiny and suspicion. She had spent the previous evening helping her daughter Sophia with a school project about immigration stories, sharing memories of her own journey from El Salvador and the challenges of building a new life in America. Her mind was occupied with ordinary parental concerns, Sophia's upcoming school dance, Carlos's college applications, and the small daily victories and struggles that defined her life. She was cleaning the Patterson family's study when Robert appeared in the doorway, his expression formal and uncomfortable. Maria immediately sensed that something had changed in the household dynamics, though she couldn't identify the specific source of the tension she felt. "Maria, I need to speak with you about something important," Robert began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he used in business meetings. "It's about your work with Emma and the cooking lessons." Maria set down her cleaning supplies and gave Robert her full attention, though anxiety began to build in her chest. In her years of domestic work, she had learned to read the subtle signs that preceded job loss or significant changes in employment. Robert's formal manner and the way he positioned himself between her and the door suggested this would not be a comfortable conversation. "I want you to understand that we appreciate what you've been doing for Emma," Robert continued, his words careful and measured. "But I've been made aware of some concerns about the appropriateness of your involvement in her treatment and recovery." The phrase "made aware" told Maria everything she needed to know about the source of these concerns. Victoria's disapproval of the cooking lessons had been obvious from the beginning, but Maria had hoped that Emma's progress would speak for itself. Apparently that hope had been naive. "What concerns?" Maria asked quietly, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Robert consulted notes that Victoria had prepared for this conversation, a formal list of grievances that transformed Maria's maternal care into suspicious behavior. "There are questions about your motivations for refusing payment for additional work, concerns about boundary violations and inappropriate emotional involvement with Emma, questions about whether you're positioning yourself to take advantage of our family's situation." Each accusation hit Maria like a physical blow, not because they threatened her employment, but because they revealed such a fundamental misunderstanding of her intentions and character. She thought about Emma's shy smiles during their cooking sessions, about the girl's growing confidence and appetite, about the simple joy of teaching someone to prepare food with love rather than anxiety. "Patterson," Maria said, her voice steady despite the pain she felt, "do you believe Emma is getting better since we started cooking together?" The directness of her question caught Robert off guard. He had expected defensiveness or attempts at justification, not this calm challenge to focus on results rather than suspicions. "Yes," he admitted reluctantly. "Emma has been eating more regularly and seems happier, but that doesn't address the concerns about your motivations." "My motivation," Maria said simply, "is that Emma reminded me of my own daughter when she was struggling. My motivation is that I know what it feels like to watch a child hurt and not know how to help. My motivation is that cooking together makes her smile, and I have not seen enough children smile in my life to waste opportunities to create more smiles." The simplicity and honesty of her response created a moment of silence in the room. Robert found himself thinking about Emma's transformation over the past few weeks, about the laughter that had returned to their household, about his daughter's renewed interest in life and food and the future. But Victoria had prepared him for this kind of emotional appeal, had warned him that Maria would likely use sentiment to deflect from the legitimate concerns being raised. He forced himself to continue with the script Victoria had provided. "I'm going to need you to maintain appropriate boundaries going forward," Robert said, his voice becoming more formal. "No more personal conversations with Emma beyond what's necessary for the cooking instruction. No more sharing stories about your family or personal life. And I'm going to need you to accept payment for the additional time you're spending here." Maria studied Robert's face carefully, seeing the internal conflict he was trying to hide behind professional detachment. She recognized the signs of someone who was acting against their own instincts, probably under pressure from someone else. "Mr. Patterson," she said gently, "what do you think will happen if you turn our cooking lessons into another job for me to perform? What do you think will happen if you tell Emma that I can only care about her if you pay me to do it?" The question struck at the heart of Robert's own fears about his relationship with Emma. He had tried to solve their family's problems with money and resources and professional services, but the only intervention that had truly helped his daughter was the freely given care of someone who asked nothing in return. But before he could respond, Victoria appeared in the doorway, her expression triumphant and determined. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said in a tone that suggested she was anything but sorry, "but I think there's something Maria should see." Victoria held up her phone, displaying what appeared to be a bank statement or financial record. "I had our accountant look into some discrepancies we've been noticing in household expenses. It seems that someone has been taking small amounts of cash from the household fund over the past several weeks.
always amounts under $50, probably thinking they wouldn't be noticed. The accusation hit the room like a bomb, transforming the atmosphere from uncomfortable confrontation to criminal allegation. Robert stared at Victoria in shock, while Maria felt the blood drain from her face as she realized the full scope of what was being suggested. "I never took any money from this house," Maria said, her voice firm despite the tremor of disbelief and hurt. "I have never stolen anything from anyone in my life." Victoria's smile was cold and satisfied. "The evidence suggests otherwise. And it explains why you've been so eager to ingratiate yourself with Emma. You've been using her recovery as cover while you systematically steal from our family." The accusation was so far beyond anything Maria could have imagined that she felt momentarily paralyzed by its enormity. In her culture, accusations of theft were among the most serious charges that could be leveled against someone, carrying implications that extended far beyond the financial loss to questions of character and honor. Robert looked between the two women, his mind struggling to process what was being alleged. The financial evidence Victoria presented seemed clear, but it contradicted everything he had observed about Maria's character and behavior. He thought about her refusal to accept payment, her obvious care for Emma, her respectful and professional demeanor throughout her employment. "Maria," he said quietly, "is there any way to explain these discrepancies?" Maria looked directly into Robert's eyes, her expression filled with a dignity that transcended her economic circumstances and employment status. "Mr. Patterson, I clean houses for a living because I am honest and hard-working, and I need to support my children. I have never taken anything that did not belong to me because my children are watching how I live my life, and I want them to be proud of their mother." The conviction in her voice created another moment of silence, broken by Victoria's decisive intervention. "I think we've heard enough," Victoria announced. "Maria, you're terminated immediately. I want you to leave the premises now, and if we discover any additional thefts, we'll be contacting the police." The finality of Victoria's pronouncement seemed to break something in the room's atmosphere. Robert realized that his wife had orchestrated this entire confrontation, had built a case against Maria based on suspicion and circumstantial evidence, and was now moving to eliminate what she clearly saw as a threat to her position in the family. But before Robert could intervene, Emma's voice cut through the tension from the stairway where she had been listening to the entire conversation.
"She didn't take any money," Emma said, her young voice carrying absolute certainty. "I know where the missing money went." All three adults turned to look at Emma, who was standing on the stairs in her pajamas, tears streaming down her face, but her posture straight and defiant. She had heard enough of the conversation to understand that Maria was being accused of theft, and the injustice of it had overcome her usual reluctance to challenge adult authority. "Emma, go back to your room," Victoria commanded sharply. "This is an adult matter that doesn't concern you." "It does concern me," Emma replied, her voice growing stronger, "because you're accusing someone who's been nothing but kind to me, and you're doing it because you're jealous that I like spending time with her more than with you." The brutal honesty of Emma's statement struck Victoria like a physical blow, but before she could respond, Emma continued, "The missing money is in my desk drawer upstairs. I've been taking small amounts from the household cash for weeks to buy supplies for a surprise I was working on. I wanted to make something special for Maria to thank her for everything she's taught me, but I was afraid to ask for money because I knew you wouldn't approve." Emma ran upstairs and returned with a small wooden box containing exactly the amount of money Victoria claimed had been stolen, along with supplies for a handmade photo album she had been creating to document her favorite recipes and cooking memories with Maria. The revelation transformed the dynamic in the room completely. Victoria's carefully constructed case against Maria collapsed in the face of Emma's innocent explanation, leaving her exposed as someone who had been so eager to believe the worst about Maria that she had ignored obvious alternative explanations. But more importantly, Emma's defense of Maria revealed the depth of the relationship that had developed between them and the teenager's clear understanding of what she was in danger of losing. She looked directly at her father, her eyes blazing with an intensity he hadn't seen since before her illness. "Dad, Maria is the only person in this house who has ever talked to me like I'm a real person instead of a problem to be solved. She doesn't care about my grades or my achievements or whether I'm living up to anyone's expectations. She just cares about whether I'm happy and whether I'm eating enough and whether I'm learning something new." Emma turned to face Victoria directly, her young voice carrying a maturity that revealed how much she had grown during her recovery process. "And you want to destroy that because you can't stand that someone else can give me something you can't. You want to get rid of her because she makes you look bad, not because she did anything wrong." The truth of Emma's accusation hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore or deny. Victoria had indeed orchestrated Maria's dismissal out of jealousy and insecurity, using false accusations to eliminate what she perceived as competition for Emma's affection and respect. Robert looked at his wife, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time since their marriage. He saw her need for control, her inability to accept that genuine care couldn't be purchased or managed, her willingness to destroy something beautiful because she couldn't possess it herself. Then he looked at Maria, who stood in the middle of his study with tears in her eyes but her dignity intact, a woman who had offered his daughter unconditional care and had been rewarded with false accusations and public humiliation. Finally, he looked at Emma, his daughter who had found her voice and her strength during the weeks she spent learning to cook with Maria, who was now willing to fight for someone who had fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. The choice was clear, but Robert realized that choosing correctly would require him to acknowledge some painful truths about his marriage and his own judgment. He would have to admit that he had allowed Victoria to nearly destroy the one thing that was genuinely helping Emma recover. He would have to confront the fact that his wife's vision of their family was based on image and control rather than love and authenticity. "Victoria," Robert said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of decision, "you're wrong about Maria. You've been wrong from the beginning, and your jealousy has led you to make false accusations against someone who has shown our family nothing but kindness." Victoria's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Robert, you can't possibly believe that this woman's influence is more important than maintaining appropriate boundaries and protecting our family's interests." "Our family's interests," Robert replied firmly, "include Emma's health and happiness. And Maria has done more to support both of those things than anyone else, including us." He turned to face Maria directly, his expression filled with regret and determination. "Maria, I owe you an apology that words can't adequately express. You offered my daughter something precious, and I allowed it to be questioned and attacked because I couldn't recognize its value." Maria nodded quietly, her eyes still filled with tears but her expression forgiving. "Mr. Patterson, Emma is getting better. That is what matters. But I cannot continue to work here if my presence causes conflict in your family. Emma needs peace to heal, not arguing." "No," Emma said immediately, panic entering her voice. "Maria, you can't leave. Please, I need you. The cooking lessons are the only thing that makes me feel normal anymore." Robert watched his daughter's reaction and realized that Maria was right about the conflict but wrong about the solution. The problem wasn't Maria's presence in their home. The problem was Victoria's inability to accept that authentic relationships couldn't be controlled or managed like business arrangements. "Maria," Robert said carefully, "would you be willing to continue helping Emma if I could guarantee that there would be no more interference or accusations? If I could promise that your role in Emma's recovery would be respected and protected?" Maria looked at Emma's hopeful face, then at Robert's sincere expression, then at Victoria's furious glare. She was being asked to choose between her professional safety and her growing love for a girl who reminded her of her own daughter. "Mr. Patterson," Maria said finally, "I will help Emma for as long as she needs me, and for as long as you truly want me here. But I need to know that you understand what you are asking. I cannot pretend to care about Emma. I cannot turn my feelings on and off like a job. If I stay, it is because I care about her like family, and family doesn't abandon each other when things get difficult. The simple power of Maria's commitment struck Robert with the force of revelation. She was describing the kind of unconditional love and loyalty that he had been unable to provide for his own daughter, that Victoria had never understood or valued, that Emma desperately needed to complete her healing. "I understand," Robert said solemnly, "and I want you to stay. Emma wants you to stay. And if anyone in this house can't accept that, then they're the ones who need to reconsider their position in this family." The ultimatum was delivered quietly but unmistakably, and Victoria understood immediately that Robert was choosing Maria and Emma over her vision of how their family should function. The realization filled her with rage and humiliation, but also with the recognition that she had fundamentally misjudged the situation. Victoria had entered this confrontation confident that she could eliminate what she saw as a threat to her authority and position. Instead, she had exposed her own insecurities and jealousies while strengthening the very relationship she had tried to destroy. Emma now saw her clearly as someone who was willing to hurt innocent people to maintain control. Robert had witnessed her capacity for false accusations and manipulative behavior, and Maria had emerged with her dignity intact and her position in the family more secure than ever. The cooking lessons resumed the following week, but the dynamic in the Patterson household had been permanently altered. Victoria maintained a cold distance from the family activities, focusing her energy on her social commitments and charitable work, while Emma and Maria continued their culinary education with Robert's full support and occasional participation. Emma's recovery accelerated in the weeks following the confrontation, as if defending Maria had also allowed her to defend her own right to healing and happiness. She began eating regular meals without the anxiety and resistance that had characterized her relationship with food for months. She started gaining weight in a healthy way, her energy returned, and her natural curiosity and intelligence re-emerged as her body received proper nourishment. But perhaps most importantly, Emma had learned that she had a voice and the right to use it in defense of what she valued. The shy, compliant girl who had nearly starved herself to meet others' expectations had been replaced by a young woman who understood her own worth and was willing to fight for the relationships that nurtured her growth. Maria continued her regular cleaning work, but her role in the household had expanded beyond anything she had imagined when she first accepted Robert's request for cooking lessons. She became Emma's confidant, cultural teacher, and surrogate maternal figure. She helped Emma navigate the social challenges of returning to school after her hospitalization, supported her through the ongoing therapy sessions that were part of her recovery, and provided the kind of steady, unconditional love that allowed Emma to rebuild her relationship with food and with herself. Robert, meanwhile, was forced to confront the reality of his marriage to Victoria and the extent to which her need for control had been damaging his relationship with Emma. He began individual therapy to address his own patterns of emotional avoidance and his tendency to approach family relationships as management problems rather than opportunities for authentic connection. The resolution of the crisis surrounding Maria's role in the family marked the beginning of Emma's true recovery, but it also initiated a period of reckoning for all the adults involved. Robert would eventually need to make difficult decisions about his marriage and his priorities. Victoria would be forced to examine her own motivations and the destructive patterns that had led to her false accusations. And Maria would discover that sometimes the families we choose through love and commitment can be more meaningful than those we inherit through biology or marriage. But on the evening after Maria's vindication, as Emma helped prepare a celebratory meal that filled the kitchen with warmth and laughter, the most important truth had already been established. Love expressed through simple acts of care and attention had proven more powerful than all the money and resources Robert could provide. A working-class woman's willingness to share her cultural heritage and maternal wisdom had accomplished what teams of expensive specialists had been unable to achieve. Emma Patterson was eating again,
laughing again, and learning that her worth as a person had nothing to do with her ability to meet others' expectations and everything to do with her capacity to give and receive authentic care. The recipe that had saved her wasn't written in any cookbook. It was composed of equal parts patience, understanding, cultural wisdom, and the kind of love that asks nothing in return but gives everything it has to offer. In the months that followed, Emma would continue to grow stronger physically and emotionally. She would return to school with new confidence and resilience. She would maintain her relationship with Maria as both teacher and surrogate family member. She would learn to cook dozens of recipes from Maria's heritage, while also exploring her own cultural background and family traditions. But the most important lesson Emma learned during those crucial weeks of recovery wasn't about food or cooking techniques. She learned that healing happens in relationship with others, that love cannot be purchased or controlled, and that sometimes the most profound gifts come from the most unexpected sources. She learned that the difference between surviving and thriving often depends on having at least one person in your life who sees your potential rather than your problems, who offers support without conditions, and who believes in your ability to overcome whatever challenges you face. The rich man's daughter had indeed begged for more of Maria's cooking, but what she was really hungry for was the love, acceptance, and authentic care that came with every meal they prepared together. And in learning to cook with Maria, Emma didn't just rediscover her appetite for food, she rediscovered her appetite for life itself. 6 months later, Emma Patterson stood in the kitchen of a small community center in East Los Angeles, her hands covered in flour as she helped a group of teenagers roll out masa for tamales. The familiar weight of the dough between her palms brought back memories of her first cooking lesson with Maria, when simple rice and beans had tasted like hope itself. Now at 16, Emma had become something she never expected, a teacher herself, passing on the lessons of healing and nourishment that had saved her life. The community center served low-income families in Maria's neighborhood, many of whom struggled with food insecurity and the kind of stress-related health issues that Emma was only beginning to understand. When Maria had suggested that Emma volunteer with their youth cooking program, Robert had initially hesitated. The neighborhood was far from their usual circles, and he worried about his daughter's safety in an unfamiliar environment. But Emma had insisted, and her determination had proven stronger than his protective instincts. She had been volunteering every Saturday for 3 months now, working alongside Maria to teach basic cooking skills to young people whose challenges made her own struggles seem almost privileged by comparison. The experience had been transformative in ways that no amount of individual therapy could have achieved. "Miss Emma, how do you know when the masa is ready?" asked Sophia, a 13-year-old whose family had recently immigrated from Guatemala. The girl's English was still hesitant, but her eagerness to learn was unmistakable. Emma paused in her own work to examine Sophia's dough, remembering how Maria had taught her to trust her senses rather than rely on precise measurements or timing. "Feel this," Emma said, guiding Sophia's hands to test the texture. "It should be smooth but not sticky, soft but not wet. Your hands will tell you when it's right." The advice echoed Maria's teaching philosophy, which had become Emma's own approach to both cooking and life. Trust your instincts. Pay attention to what your body tells you. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, because that's how you learn what works. These Saturday sessions had become the highlight of Emma's week, but they had also created unexpected complications in her home life. Victoria had never quite recovered from the humiliation of her false accusations against Maria, and Emma's growing involvement with the community center represented another challenge to her vision of appropriate activities for a Patterson family member. "I don't understand why you insist on spending your weekends in that neighborhood," Victoria had said during a tense family dinner the previous week. "There are plenty of volunteer opportunities with organizations that serve our own community. The Junior League has excellent programs that would look much better on college applications." Emma's response had been swift and confident.
I'm not volunteering to impress college admissions committees. I'm volunteering because these kids need to learn the same things Maria taught me, and I'm one of the few people who can bridge that gap. The exchange had highlighted the growing distance between Emma and Victoria, but it had also revealed how much Emma had changed since her hospitalization.
The girl who had once desperately sought approval from authority figures now trusted her own judgment about what mattered in her life. Robert watched these developments with a mixture of pride and concern. Emma's recovery had exceeded every medical professional's expectations, but her growing independence and strong opinions sometimes created tension in their household. More challenging was the reality that Emma's volunteer work had opened his eyes to social and economic realities he had previously ignored. Through Emma's stories about the families she met at the community center, Robert learned about children who went hungry not because of psychological disorders, but because their parents worked multiple jobs and still couldn't afford adequate nutrition. He learned about teenagers who dropped out of school to help support their families, about mothers who skipped meals so their children could eat, about the daily struggles of people whose problems couldn't be solved by writing checks or hiring specialists. The knowledge was uncomfortable because it challenged Robert's assumptions about poverty and success. He had always believed that hard work and good decisions led to prosperity, that people who struggled financially had somehow failed to take advantage of available opportunities. Meeting some of the families Emma worked with forced him to confront the limitations of his worldview. Maria had become the bridge between these two worlds, helping Robert understand the community where she lived while also helping Emma navigate the complexities of volunteering across cultural and economic differences. Her role in their family had evolved far beyond the cooking lessons that had initiated their relationship. Though food remained the foundation of everything they shared, the Patterson family dinners had been transformed completely. Instead of the formal, silent affairs they had been during Emma's illness, meals now featured animated conversations about recipes, cultural traditions, and the stories Emma brought home from her volunteer work. Robert found himself looking forward to these evening gatherings, which had become opportunities for genuine connection rather than obligatory family time. Victoria participated in these dinners with polite detachment, maintaining her composure but clearly uncomfortable with the direction their family life had taken. She had stopped trying to directly oppose Emma's relationship with Maria or her volunteer work, but her disapproval remained obvious in her body language and careful neutrality. The tension came to a head during Emma's 16th birthday celebration. Robert had initially planned an elaborate party at an exclusive country club, the kind of event that would be appropriate for a Patterson family milestone. But Emma had requested something different, a celebration at their home with Maria's extended family and some of the teenagers from the community center. Absolutely not, Victoria had declared when Emma presented her proposal. Your sweet 16 should be elegant and appropriate to your social position. Having a house party with people from that neighborhood is completely inappropriate. Emma's response revealed how much her confidence had grown during her recovery. It's my birthday, and these are the people who matter to me. If you can't accept that, then maybe you should reconsider whether you want to be part of the celebration. The confrontation forced Robert to make a choice that would define their family's future direction. He could support Victoria's vision of appropriate social boundaries, or he could honor Emma's wishes and the relationships that had been instrumental in her healing. We'll have the party here, Robert announced, his decision final despite Victoria's shocked expression. Emma's birthday should celebrate the life she's built for herself, and that life includes Maria's family and the friends she's made through her volunteer work. The party itself became a revelation for everyone involved. Maria's children, Carlos and Sofia, brought energy and warmth that had been missing from Patterson family gatherings for years. The teenagers from the community center were initially intimidated by the mansion's opulence, but Emma's genuine friendship with them soon created an atmosphere of comfortable celebration. The highlight of the evening was a cooking demonstration that Emma and Maria presented together, showing the guests how to prepare some of the dishes that had been central to Emma's recovery. Watching his daughter teach others while laughing and moving with confident grace around the kitchen, Robert felt a profound sense of gratitude for the woman who had made this transformation possible, but the party also highlighted the growing rift in his marriage. Victoria spent the evening maintaining polite conversation with guests while clearly counting the minutes until they would leave. Her discomfort was obvious to everyone, including Maria's family, who responded with the kind of gracious dignity that made Victoria's attitude seem petty and unwelcoming. After the guests left and Emma had gone to bed, glowing with happiness from her celebration, Robert and Victoria finally had the conversation that had been building for months. "This can't continue, Robert," Victoria said, her composure finally cracking. "Emma's involvement with these people is affecting our entire social standing. The way she talks about that community center, the time she spends in that neighborhood, the relationship she's formed with people who have nothing in common with our lifestyle. It's not appropriate, and it's not healthy." Robert studied his wife's face, seeing the fear and insecurity beneath her criticism. Victoria had built her identity around social position and cultural capital, and Emma's choices threatened the careful image she had constructed for their family. "What's not healthy?" Robert replied carefully. "Is Emma starving herself because she felt like nothing she did was ever good enough? What's not healthy is our daughter feeling like she had to be perfect to deserve love and acceptance. Maria and the people Emma works with have given her something we couldn't, the understanding that her worth isn't conditional on her achievements or her ability to meet other people's expectations." Victoria's response was swift and defensive. "I never wanted Emma to feel that way. Everything I did was to help her reach her potential, to prepare her for the kind of future she deserves." "The future she deserves," Robert said quietly, "is one where she gets to choose what matters to her, where she can form relationships based on mutual care and respect, where she can use her advantages to help others instead of just accumulating more advantages for herself." The conversation continued through the night, touching on fundamental differences in values and priorities that had been masked by their shared commitment to providing Emma with every possible opportunity. By dawn, both Robert and Victoria understood that their marriage had reached a crossroads that would require difficult decisions about their future together. Meanwhile, Emma was planning a project that would bring her two worlds together in an unexpected way. Working with Maria and the staff at the community center, she had developed a proposal for a nutrition and cooking education program that could be implemented in local schools. The program would combine practical cooking instruction with education about food systems, cultural traditions, and the relationship between nutrition and mental health. Emma presented her proposal to Robert during one of their regular Saturday morning breakfasts, a tradition that had emerged during her recovery as protected time for father-daughter conversation without Victoria's involvement. "I want to use part of my trust fund to create a foundation that supports programs like this," Emma explained, her presentation as polished as any business proposal Robert had seen. "Not just in Maria's neighborhood but in schools throughout the city where kids need access to this kind of education." Robert listened with growing amazement as his daughter outlined a comprehensive vision for addressing food insecurity and nutrition education through community-based programming. Her proposal demonstrated sophisticated understanding of social issues, practical knowledge of program implementation, and a mature grasp of how philanthropy could be used to create meaningful change. "Where did you learn to think about problems this way?" Robert asked, genuinely curious about the development of his daughter's analytical and strategic thinking. Emma smiled, and Robert could see Maria's influence in her expression. "Maria taught me that when you help one person, you learn how to help many people. And you taught me that when you want to solve big problems, you need good planning and adequate resources. I'm just combining what I learned from both of you." The foundation that Emma proposed would become reality within 6 months, funded initially by Robert's resources but guided by Emma's vision and Maria's practical wisdom. The first pilot programs were implemented in schools near the community center, with curricula developed by Emma, Maria, and a team of nutrition educators who shared their commitment to culturally responsive and trauma-informed approaches to food education.
Victoria's reaction to Emma's philanthropic initiative was predictably negative. She saw it as another example of inappropriate involvement with people outside their social circle, another deviation from the path she had envisioned for Emma's development. But her criticism had lost its power to influence either Robert or Emma, who had developed confidence in their own judgment about what constituted meaningful work. The success of Emma's foundation programs created opportunities for her to speak at conferences and events about the relationship between food, culture, and healing. Her presentations were powerful because they drew on personal experience as well as the practical knowledge she had gained through her volunteer work and foundation activities. During one particularly memorable presentation to a group of pediatric healthcare providers, Emma shared the story of her own recovery while emphasizing the importance of addressing eating disorders within the context of family systems and cultural understanding. "The medical intervention saved my life," she explained to the audience of doctors, nurses, and therapists, "but what saved my relationship with food was learning that eating could be an expression of care rather than a measure of control." That lesson came from someone who had no formal training in eating disorder treatment, but who understood that healing happens in relationship with others, and that food can be medicine when it's prepared and shared with love. Maria attended that presentation sitting in the back of the auditorium and crying quietly as she listened to Emma describe their cooking lessons and the impact they had on her recovery. After Emma finished speaking, several audience members approached Maria to ask about her approach to using food and cooking as therapeutic interventions. "I am not a therapist," Maria explained to the group of medical professionals. "I am a mother who knows that children need to feel loved and accepted for who they are, not just for what they achieve." Emma needed someone to help her remember that eating is about nourishing your body so you can live your life, not about being perfect or meeting other people's expectations. The conversation that followed led to invitations for Maria to consult with treatment programs and speak to other families dealing with eating disorders. She began to develop a reputation as someone who could bridge cultural and economic differences in approaches to food and healing, bringing practical wisdom to complement clinical interventions. These professional opportunities created new possibilities for Maria's own future. She was able to reduce her cleaning work and focus more time on the consulting and speaking that utilized her natural gifts for teaching and nurturing. The financial stability that resulted from this work allowed her children to focus on their education without the constant stress of economic insecurity. Carlos graduated high school with honors and received a full scholarship to study engineering at a prestigious university. Sophia, inspired partly by Emma's example and partly by her mother's new career, decided to pursue studies in social work with the goal of eventually opening her own community center. The transformation of Maria's circumstances created another challenge for Victoria, who had difficulty accepting that the cleaning woman she had once tried to dismiss was now a sought-after consultant whose expertise was valued by medical professionals and foundations. The reversal of their relative social positions was a constant reminder of Victoria's misjudgment and the limitations of her worldview. Robert and Victoria eventually separated, then divorced with relatively little acrimony but clear recognition that their values and priorities had diverged beyond reconciliation. Victoria moved to a condominium in Beverly Hills and focused her energy on social activities and charitable work that aligned with her preference for traditional philanthropy and high society engagement. Emma maintained a polite but distant relationship with Victoria, understanding that her stepmother's limitations didn't make her a bad person, just someone whose approach to life was incompatible with the values Emma had developed through her recovery and volunteer work. The divorce allowed Robert to be more honest with himself about what he wanted from his personal life and relationships. He had spent years prioritizing business success and social status over emotional connection and authentic relationships. Emma's crisis and recovery had forced him to confront the emptiness of that approach and to develop new priorities based on meaningful engagement with the people and causes he cared about. Robert began spending more time at the community center, initially to better understand Emma's work, but eventually because he found genuine satisfaction in contributing to programs that created tangible improvements in people's lives. His business background proved valuable in helping the center develop sustainable funding strategies and expand their programming to serve more families. On a warm spring evening 2 years after Emma's initial hospitalization, the Patterson family celebrated another milestone, Emma's acceptance to Stanford University with plans to study public policy and nutrition science. The celebration was held at Emma's request at the community center, with Maria's extended family and dozens of young people whose lives had been touched by Emma's foundation programs. Emma's acceptance speech delivered to the gathering of friends and chosen family who had supported her recovery and growth reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 years ago I was so lost that I forgot how to eat, how to trust my own body, how to believe that I deserved love and care, she said, her voice strong and clear. I thought I had to be perfect to be worthy, and that pursuit of perfection almost killed me. She looked directly at Maria, who was standing with Carlos and Sofia near the front of the gathered crowd. But I learned from someone very wise that perfectionism is not the same thing as excellence, that control is not the same thing as strength, and that the most important recipe for a good life includes ingredients that can't be measured or purchased. Emma's speech concluded with an announcement that surprised even Robert and Maria. She had decided to take a gap year before starting college, using the time to work with the foundation to develop a comprehensive curriculum for food and nutrition education that could be implemented in schools nationwide. I want to spend this year learning from the communities we serve, developing programs that reflect their wisdom and cultural knowledge, not just imposing solutions from outside, Emma explained. College will be there when I'm ready, but right now there's work to do that can't wait. The decision to defer college was vintage Emma, thoughtful, independent, and focused on service rather than personal advancement. Robert felt immense pride in his daughter's maturity and commitment, even as he recognized that her choices would continue to challenge conventional expectations about what constituted success and appropriate life paths. As the celebration wound down and guests began to leave, Robert found himself standing in the community center kitchen with Maria and Emma, washing dishes and cleaning up after the party. The simple domestic task felt profound, a symbol of how far they had all traveled from the sterile formality that had once characterized their family interactions. Maria, Robert said as they worked side by side, I've never properly thanked you for what you gave Emma, for what you gave our family. Maria smiled, her hands never pausing in their work. Mr. Patterson, Emma gave me something too. She reminded me that being a mother doesn't end when your own children grow up. There are always young people who need someone to believe in them, to teach them that they are worthy of love and care. Emma looked up from the pot she was scrubbing, her face glowing with the kind of contentment that comes from knowing you are exactly where you belong. The recipe you taught me, she said to Maria, wasn't just about cooking. It was about how to nourish yourself and other people, how to create something beautiful from simple ingredients, how to share what you have even when it doesn't seem like much. The three of them finished cleaning in comfortable silence, each lost in reflection about the journey that had brought them together and the future they were building through their continued partnership. Outside, the Los Angeles sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, and the sounds of the city created a backdrop of life and possibility. Emma's story had become more than just a tale of recovery from an eating disorder. It had become a testament to the power of authentic relationships to transform lives, to the importance of cultural wisdom in addressing modern problems, and to the possibility of using privilege and resources to create meaningful change in the world. The rich man's daughter had indeed begged for more of Maria's cooking, but what she had received was far more valuable than any recipe. She had learned that true nourishment comes from connection, that healing happens in community, and that the most important ingredients for a fulfilling life are love, purpose, and the courage to follow your own path even when it diverges from others' expectations. As they turned off the lights and prepared to leave the community center, Emma, Robert, and Maria knew that their story was far from over. There would be more challenges, more opportunities to grow and learn, more chances to demonstrate that families created by choice and mutual care can be just as strong as those formed by biology or convenience. The recipe for forever, Emma had learned, was surprisingly simple. Take 1 part courage, add generous amounts of love and understanding, season with cultural wisdom and life experience, mix gently with patience and persistence, and serve to anyone who needs nourishment for both body and soul. The results, when prepared with authentic care and attention, were guaranteed to satisfy the deepest hungers of the human heart. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.